Good evening, I'm Nima and this is Forum Daily for Monday, July 18th. We begin tonight with a fundraising campaign that Catholic bishops are trying to call attention to. This comes amid frustrations around a previous fundraising pledge that didn't come through. The Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops is now highlighting differences between its current fundraising campaign for residential school survivors and a failed Best Efforts campaign launched in 2006. That one saw 48 Catholic church entities agree to fundraise $25 million for survivors, but in the end, they raised less than $4 million. The bishops have promised to provide public updates on their $30 million Indigenous Reconciliation Fund, but so far they have not done so. All right, turning to Alberta now, where the Premier is adding his voice to the chorus of criticism aimed at the Trudeau government. This for its decision to send parts of a Russian natural gas pipeline back to Germany. In a video posted to social media yesterday, Jason Kenney accused the Liberals of impeding efforts to export responsible Canadian energy to Europe. This while helping Russian state-owned energy company Gazprom. Earlier this month, Canada granted an exemption to the economic sanctions against Russia, which allows 6 Montreal-repaired turbines to be returned to Germany for use in the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. Meanwhile, Ottawa is trying to tackle emissions from the oil and gas sector with 2 options to set a ceiling for emissions. The government is proposing to use an industry-specific cap-and-trade system or a modified carbon pricing system. It says this could drive emissions down by almost 40% by the end of this decade. The 2 options are contained in a discussion paper that Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault was set to publish today. Still, the Oil Sands Pathway Alliance of Canada's 6 biggest oil sands companies want the target to be lower, and they argue anything more would force production cuts and cause job losses. Turning to Canada's housing market now, as the annual pace of housing starts slowed by 3% between May and June. Canada Mortgage and Housing reports the annual rate of urban starts of apartments and condos fell 3% last month. This while the rate of single detached urban starts fell 4%. The 6-month moving average of housing starts rose by 6,000 to 258,295 in June. On the West Coast, a wildfire burning near Lytton, BC has destroyed 6 homes on the Lytton First Nation. Some of the almost 100 people forced to leave their homes were able to return over the weekend. They came to salvage food and other things that were left behind when the fire broke out on Thursday. The BC Wildfire Service reports the fire is still burning out of control and has grown to more than 17 square kilometers. All right, well, another wildfire is burning in Manitoba. This is where fewer than 30 people are left in the Matthias Column Cree Nation, located northwest of the province. Everyone else left over the weekend by train or by aircraft in the face of a growing wildfire. The 230 square kilometer fire is burning less than a kilometer from Pukatawagan, a community on the First Nation. All right, to the east, the Nova Scotia mass shooting public inquiry is holding a roundtable discussion today. They're looking into the potential links between violence against women and mass killings. The 7 participants include a women's studies professor, several criminologists, and a legal scholar. Police have said the April 2020 mass shooting that took the lives of 22 people started with the killer assaulting his spouse. In the nation's capital, Patrick King, an organizer of the truck convoy that gridlocked downtown for 3 weeks earlier this year, has been granted bail. The decision was delivered this morning in an Ottawa courtroom. Mr. King's bail conditions include a ban on social media use, an order not to contact other convoy organizers, and a nightly curfew. He's facing more than a dozen charges, including mischief, obstructing a police officer, perjury, and obstruction of justice. Canadian sprint star Andre deGrasse has withdrawn from the 200 meters at the World Track and Field Championships. This is the event in which he won Olympic gold last summer in Tokyo. The 27-year-old from Markham, Ontario, tested positive for COVID-19 less than a month ago. The 200-meter heats are scheduled for tonight. Legislation to recognize Migma as Nova Scotia's first language has been proclaimed by the province and affirmed by Migma chiefs. It was officially enshrined as the first language during a ceremony in the Potlatak First Nation on Sunday. The First Language Act, which takes effect on October 1st or Treaty Day, aims to ensure meaningful access to Indigenous language and culture. Forum Daily will be right back after a short break, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. Canadians who pay the federal carbon price got a midsummer money drop on Friday. This is the first half of their annual climate action incentive payment deposited into their bank accounts. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau promoted the payments as a way to bring Canadians along in the fight against climate change without causing them financial hardship. People who filed their 2021 tax returns in Ontario, Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan received the deposits on Friday. This to cover half the amount they can expect to receive for the 2022 to 2023 fiscal year. The rest will come in quarterly payments in mid-September and mid-January. However, one organization claims that federal carbon pricing costs more than it returns. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation says that a recent report by the Parliamentary Budget Officer says Ontario families will, on average, pay about $360 extra in carbon pricing in 2022, even with the rebates. Well, with us now to discuss this is Mr. Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Mr. Terrazzano, great to have you back, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So can you tell us a little bit more about this research into federal carbon pricing and how much it will actually cost Canadians?
Unfortunately, the Trudeau government hasn't been exactly honest with Canadians about the true cost of the carbon tax. The Trudeau government claims that families will be better off with its carbon tax and rebate, but the Parliamentary Budget Officer's numbers show that the government is using magic math. That's because this year, the carbon tax will cost the average household anywhere between $300 all the way up to $670, depending on which province you live in, even after accounting for the rebates. So it turns out, which we've been talking about, is that the carbon tax is an unnecessary and very painful cost for many Canadians who are already struggling with the rising cost of living.
And what's interesting is that not all Canadians fall under the federal carbon pricing system. So can you unpack that for our viewers?
Yeah, that's correct. So what we're talking about, the direct federal carbon tax, is for taxpayers in provinces like Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. But the other taxpayers in other provinces are not coming out of here scot-free. And that's because the Trudeau government is forcing the other provinces to impose a carbon tax of their own. Now, if we're looking at a place like Montreal, for example, when you include all of the taxes, every time you fill up your car in Montreal, you're paying 6 different types of taxes. The same thing applies in a place like Vancouver. 6 different taxes every time you fuel up, where the total tax bill makes up 75 cents per liter of gas.
Now, taking a look at your numbers here, we know the CTF used a PBO report to find these numbers, but were there any additional findings in this report that we should know about?
Yeah, there are. And here's the key additional finding is that unfortunately, the big tax bill is only getting worse. And that's because Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says that he'll continue to crank up his carbon tax to nearly 40 cents per liter of gas by 2030. So if you look at from now all the way to 2030, the carbon tax will cost the average household between $6,400 all the way up to $13,000, depending on what province you live in, even after accounting for the rebates.
So what do we know so far about where these additional funds are being allocated to address the issue of climate change?
Well, the Trudeau government is essentially saying that most of the rebates are just going to be going back to households. Again, it makes the claim that most families will be better off because they'll get more rebates than carbon taxes. But again, the government's own independent budget watchdog shows that that is magic math. And the numbers put out by the Parliamentary Budget Officer make it clear that the average household will, in fact, pay hundreds of dollars more in the carbon tax than what they'll get back in rebates.
All right, sir, about a minute left here. So let's talk solutions. What kind of steps is the CTF advising the government to take to not only address climate change, but not hurt Canadians' wallets?
The first thing that we have to remember is that a carbon tax is not a low-cost environmental plan. The carbon tax is a high-cost tax plan. I mean, BC has had the highest carbon tax in Canada for years, but emissions continue to go up. Emissions under the first year of the Trudeau government's national carbon tax also went up. So what we're calling on the federal government to follow the lead of many other countries. President Joe Biden's pushing for gas tax relief. The European Parliament's largest political party pushing for gas tax relief. The Netherlands, Germany, South Korea, India, Italy, Ireland, states like New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Florida, they've all announced gas tax relief. So we're calling on the feds to cut the carbon tax, cut the GST, cut the federal gas tax, and provide Canadians with much needed relief at the pumps.
All right, Mr. Terrazzano, always great having you on Forum Daily. Thank you again for your time today.
Well, thanks for having me on.
When we come back from break, we've got more national stories affecting Canadians from coast to coast as Toronto's mayor speaks about gun violence after 3 separate shootings that occurred in the span of just a few days. We'll have that story and more coming up next. A judge in Lethbridge, Alberta, has denied bail for a 4th man charged with conspiracy to commit murder at a border blockade near Coutts back in February. 40-year-old Jerry Morin has been ordered held in custody until he and 3 others go on trial in June. They are all accused of conspiring to kill police officers at the blockade, which was set up to protest COVID-19 vaccine mandates and other pandemic restrictions. The Mounties found long guns, handguns, body armor, large amounts of ammunition, and high-capacity magazines in 3 trailers at the protest site. In Toronto, the mayor is speaking out about gun violence after the country's largest city was rocked by a weekend of bloodshed. 3 separate shootings occurred over the last few days, leaving behind 1 dead and several injured. John Tory says the shootings are, quote, extremely upsetting and unsettling for people, as they are for me. Police have identified the latest fatality from a shooting near Union Station as 24-year-old Stefan Little McClacken. There have been no arrests related to any of the shootings. Meanwhile, the mayor of Clearwater BC is calling for better communication from Interior Health. This is after an unannounced shutdown of the emergency room at his community's hospital overnight on Saturday. Merlin Blackwell says he wasn't advised of the 6 p.m. to 7 a.m. closure. He noted that would be standard practice. Mr. Blackwell says he intends to bring up the issue when he meets locally with Interior Health officials today. Clearwater's ER has been closed 20 times so far this year. On the East Coast, a physician who arrived in St. John's last month after fleeing the Russian invasion of Ukraine wants to work. But she says she has been frustrated by the lack of help from the Newfoundland and Labrador government. Marina Sikorska emailed the government on July 7th, but didn't receive a reply until last night. Some doctors waiting to hear from the provincial government say they are being contacted by Nova Scotia's health department, asking them to move to that province. All right, turning to a looming strike involving more than 1,800 workers at 8 Ontario casinos. The workers voted to go on strike if they don't reach a new contract agreement by midnight Friday. Uniforce says its bargaining team has prioritized wages, benefits, and pensions, and it also wants to see part-time positions converted into full-time jobs. Great Canadian Gaming Corporation, which has 25 properties across 4 provinces, was acquired last September by Apollo Asset Management. Canadian oil sands companies are exploring the possibility of using small modular nuclear reactors at their mining facilities. The Pathways Alliance is a group of 6 companies representing 95% of Canadian oil sands production. It says it may be feasible to use nuclear power instead of natural gas to create the high-temperature heat needed to mine bitumen. Small modular reactors are a type of design that is far smaller than a conventional reactor. This makes them potentially applicable in industrial settings. While SMRs aren't yet commercially available, the technology is getting close. Moving to Manitoba, where a wireless carrier that provides service to customers in the province will be shutting down at the end of August. Explore Mobile says it was able to get through a number of challenges. This includes vigorous competition and the pandemic, but it could not overcome what it called the cloud of uncertainty created by regulatory delays. Explore Mobile was created as part of an arrangement to appease federal regulators. This was after BCE announced in 2016 that it would acquire Manitoba Telecom Services Incorporated. The company says TELUS-owned Koodo has created an offer exclusively for Explore Mobile customers who will now be without a wireless provider. Well, if you ever wanted to learn more about lobster, you now have a place to go. The Homeris Center is now open in Shediac, New Brunswick. It is offering insight into the Northumberland Strait marine ecosystem. The center is owned by the Maritime Fishermen's Union, and visitors can learn about lobster from beginning right up to the plate. A tank at the center even allows visitors to reach in and touch a lobster. A 23-year-old Canadian athlete unleashed a hammer throw at the World Track and Field Championships that landed her in the history books. Cameron Rogers threw 75.52 meters to win silver during the Sunday competition, and she also happened to capture the country's first ever women's podium finish in a field event. She was bookended by Americans. Brooke Anderson won gold with a toss of 78.96 on her final throw, while Janae Casanavoid made 74.86 to claim bronze. When we come back, we've got more news from around the world as the United Kingdom experiences its first ever extreme heat warning. And Sri Lanka's acting president has declared a state of emergency. So stay tuned. We'll be back shortly here on Forum Daily News. The highest temperature ever recorded in the UK is 38.7 Celsius, which was set in 2019. Now that's expected to fall today as the nation swelters under its first ever extreme heat warning. Met Office CEO Penelope Endersby says highs of 41 are possible. Hot weather has gripped southern Europe since last week. This triggered wildfires in Spain, Portugal, and France. Almost 600 heat-related deaths have been reported in Spain and Portugal. This is where temperatures reached 47 degrees Celsius last week. All right, turning to Sri Lanka now, where the acting president has declared a state of emergency. This gives him broad authority amid growing protests demanding his resignation. And it comes 2 days before the country's lawmakers are set to elect a new president. Ranil Wickremesinghe became acting president on Friday after his predecessor Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who fled abroad and resigned. This was after months-long mass protests over the country's economic collapse. Mr. Wickremesinghe's move to impose a state of emergency comes as protests demanding his resignation have continued in most parts of the country. Mr. Wickremesinghe said in a statement that negotiations for a bailout package with the International Monetary Fund were nearing conclusion, but there has been no comment from the IMF. Lawmakers will meet on Wednesday to elect a new president. Well, it looks like Europe is feeling the pain from Russia's war in Ukraine. Mounting pressure from high energy prices is driving record inflation, and it's raising the likelihood of a plunge back into recession. An energy crisis fueled by European reliance on Russian natural gas has spread throughout the economy. The euro has sagged to a 20-year low against the dollar. While Europe struggles, Russia has stabilized its currency and inflation. This through a fortress economy built to withstand international sanctions. But economists say that picture is misleading and that Russia has bought itself long-term economic stagnations by launching the war. To the east, foreign ministers of South Korea and Japan have held talks in Tokyo in what both sides say was a renewed effort to improve bilateral relations. The countries' ties have been strained. This is mostly over historical issues such as Japan's colonization of the Korean peninsula and Tokyo's mobilization of Korean laborers and sex slaves leading up to and during World War II. At the heart of the dispute are South Korean court rulings in 2018, which ordered 2 Japanese companies, Nippon Steel and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, to compensate forced Korean laborers. The Japanese companies have refused to comply with the rulings, and the former laborers and their supporters responded by pushing for the forced sale of corporate assets of Nippon Steel and Mitsubishi. All right, moving to Washington, where jury selection begins today in the trial of former Trump advisor Steve Bannon. He's charged with 2 counts of criminal contempt of Congress. This for defying a subpoena from the committee that's investigating the January 6th riots at the Capitol. The committee says a primetime hearing this Thursday will offer the most compelling evidence yet of then-President Donald Trump's failure to perform his duty on the day of the insurrection. All right, well, meanwhile, a damning report and hours of body camera footage further highlights the chaotic response to a mass shooting at a Uvalde, Texas elementary school. Hundreds of law enforcement officers were massed at the scene, but then they waited to confront the gunman even after a child's 911 call from inside of the building. The newly released findings are the first to criticize both state and federal law enforcement, and not just local authorities. The shooter managed to kill 19 students and 2 teachers before being killed by police. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is criticizing delegates from 40 countries. This for playing the blame game instead of taking responsibility for their collective failure to fight climate change. Delegates met in Berlin today to discuss how to stay focused on fighting climate change and address its increasing impact, all while the world reels from the economic fallout of the pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Organizers have billed the meeting as a chance to rebuild trust between rich and poor nations ahead of November's UN Climate Summit. The mother of a 12-year-old Toronto girl who became the youngest person in Canada to receive an artificial heart says her daughter is thriving. Miriam Tanis had the operation a little more than 1 year ago. Her family says Miriam is embracing her summer, swimming 4 times a week and playing basketball with her older brother. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow our social media handles. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily.